Welcome back to Vital, a mini-series dedicated to talking about mental health issues specifically surrounding Asianness and Asian culture. My name is Tian Yue, and for this video, we want to focus on a topic that can be difficult to talk about in any culture: loss. People go through loss for so many different reasons. Maybe you're having to say goodbye to family members, friends, or pets. Maybe you feel lonely at the end of a big romantic relationship, or moving away from home. None of these things are easy, and while the reasons we experience loss are different for everyone, what connects us is our feelings about them, like grief. In that connection, we can find ways to heal and help others do the same. So what is loss? Loss happens when something deeply negative occurs to someone. It's usually associated with feelings of sadness, anger, guilt, anxiety, loneliness, or even helplessness. It can even show in your physical health. You can lose sleep, be more jittery, have unexplained body aches. In the Netflix show Never Have I Ever, the main character Debbie loses her ability to walk for months after the sudden death of her father. Doctors tried to determine what was wrong with her, but from a medical perspective, everything was fine. It was simply a physical representation of her trauma. Trauma is any sort of terrible event that causes distress and emotional problems. In Japanese and Chinese languages, trauma is described as a wound to the heart or 心体感受, and physical damage or 创伤, like the impact death had on Debbie. There are a lot of ways to group trauma. Life transitions, like the one I mentioned before, historical trauma, such as going through forced migration and colonization, collective trauma, like the devastation we feel as we hear about tragedies in our home countries, and intergenerational trauma, when past events have lasting effects that get passed down to each new generation. Today, we want to focus on collective trauma and life transitions, and the loss and grief we've felt because of them throughout the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has completely changed our world. As we all know, these last few years have been incredibly difficult, and for our Asian and Asian American communities, even violent. Studies show that the occurrence of acts of anti-Asian hate, such as discrimination, verbal attacks, and even murder, increased by over 300% in 2021. 300%. For a while, it felt like every time you turned on the news, there would be another tragedy targeting Asians and Asian Americans. Acts of violence reminding us that, despite what progress we think the country has made, xenophobia, racism, and bigotry are still very real. That's a lot for one community to carry, much less one person. Because of this, more of us have depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of us get nervous being in predominantly white spaces, or are scared of public transportation. Many of us are worried about what might happen to our Asian family members or friends. Hearing so much about anti-Asian hate and having to worry about it happening to you and your loved ones can be incredibly painful. On top of all of this, we've lost jobs and were forced to close down our businesses. We've missed out on opportunities to move and study abroad. We've also had to miss major events in our personal lives: birthdays, weddings, graduations, and funerals. Let's take a moment to focus on this last one, because many of us have lost someone during this pandemic, even if it wasn't to COVID. Eastern cultures typically view and treat death differently than Western cultures. The movie The Farewell said it best. In the East, a person's life is part of a whole. This can be true to death too. Death is something that the community works together to process. In Taraha, Indonesia, people who have passed will be kept at home until their family feels they've saved enough money for a burial that will honor them best, and contacted every single relative so that they can travel there to grieve and celebrate that person's life. It's part of our duty to honor that life together, same as it's our collective pain to bear when a family member tells us that they've recently lost their job, or we hear about another racist act towards someone in our community. But helping others shoulder these pains can be hard to do if we are feeling overwhelmed with our own grief. You want to show up for everyone, but chances are you are going through a loss of your own, even if it's different from theirs. And it can be really hard to carry the weight of your duties with a fragile foundation. It's like when you're on a flight and the attendant tells you, in case of an emergency, put your oxygen masks on so nothing happens to you before you try to help others with theirs. If you want to effectively be there for your loved ones through their grief, you also have to process your own. When grief settles, it makes way for healing. This means finding strategies for coping that feel healthy and comfortable. If you need to surround yourself with friends, call them up. If you need to scream or cry or binge watch the Joy Luck Club, go for it. And if you need to travel or be alone for a bit to get some physical and emotional distance from the situation, that's okay too. You should allow yourself to take up space with your grief, however long that takes. And if it ever becomes too difficult, when those feelings of loss get heavier and heavier, know when to seek professional help from your doctor or a therapist, counselor, or support group. Let's be honest, not everyone has deep knowledge about helping someone through grief and loss, and you might not either, but that's understandable. But another truth is, you're never going to know exactly the right thing to say to someone, just as there isn't a correct way for people to grieve. So when you start thinking about taking care of others, know that you're doing the best that you can. If you notice that your little cousin is more irritable than normal, or that your auntie is holding back tears at the dinner table, chances are something could be off and you might feel the need to do something. It's customary in Filipino culture to always give grieving families bao or supplies. This usually means food, but it can also mean lending you a book they think would help, or making you a healing playlist on Spotify. In Malaysian, Vietnamese, and other Asian cultures, when families have lost a loved one, family members will come together to help maintain their loved one's grave, adding fresh flowers, flutes, or holy water, sweeping the area and reciting prayers, or speaking to the departed in general. You can exchange stories highlighting the happier times, or cook and eat a meal together for some crucial quality time. All of these things can be a huge comfort to someone who's experiencing loss. Generally though, the safest thing to do is ask what that person needs from you. If they insist they don't need anything at all, it's probably best not to force the topic. So try just spending time with them in silence, or give them space of their own. Research has found that Asians and Asian Americans rely on implicit social support, or just being around each other. The fact that you're physically there for someone can go a long way too. There's an analogy for dealing with grief called the ball and the box. This box represents your life, and inside are two things: a ball labeled grief and a button labeled pain. The ball starts out really big, and as it bounces around the box, it constantly presses on the button. Eventually, the ball gets smaller, and while it doesn't hit the button as often, it still does sometimes. Healing from loss isn't a linear process. Some days you might feel almost okay again, and then you might see a friend moving to the city you wanted to, or you will hear a song that you used to sing during karaoke with your loved one play on the radio, and you will feel that wound in the heart again. But when that time comes, you can find a little hope in knowing that one day, instead of feeling pain, you might be excited to visit them or start singing along. And whether it's your loved one or the family you're surrounded with, someone will be saying it right back to you. Whatever loss or grief you might have, we hope you might find comfort in knowing that you aren't alone and that there's always someone out there to help you through it in your own time. Thanks for joining us on another video with Vida. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel and connect with us on social media for more content. I hope to see you in another video, and until then, be well.